At the heart of the Cyclades stands a beach like no other. Loomed over by mighty mountain chains, the island of which it is a part, Naxos, is unique in many ways. To enter the hinterlands of this largest landmass in the Cycladic Islands is to roam in a continent in itself. A land awash with mythic associations and genuine epoch-defining archaeology, where the demigod Dionysus danced, and Zeus himself is said to have spent his childhood. Much closer to the sea, past the foothills and ancient groves of the western lowlands, the remains of Mycenaean chamber tombs sprawl at the water's edge, mostly ruined now on the jagged rocks of Aplamata, where they've stood for well over 3,000 years. Victim to the earthquakes which have so often blighted this hauntingly beautiful land. The tombs overlook a modern town today, commercial hub and largest on the island. A new shoreline for a new epoch. Just as on many a Greek island, there are hotels, beer-guzzling Brits, and ancient temples. But Grotta Beach is different. Just meters out into the surf at this northern point of the administrative centre of Kora, the ruins of a complete submerged ancient settlement are to be seen. Other sections having once sprawled under the modern town. In ancient times, the view here would have been very different. The shoreline and Bronze Age city with it, jutting out much further into the waves. On windy days, of which there are plenty on the Cyclades, there's no chance of sighting the bulwarks of those 3,400-year-old remains. But when it's clear, a truly astonishing display is to be had. A real-life Atlantis that sunk beneath the waves at the end of the late Bronze Age. If you want to hear more about this fascinating era of human history, where so many institutions, societal structures, myths and legends of our world were born, all made the old-fashioned way with none of this AI rubbish, same as I've been doing now for a decade, then I've made a whole series of videos on this time period. We've got Mycenaean Greeks, Hittites, Akkadians and much more. You can check it all out here. Don't forget to subscribe, and now, come with me on an epic journey through time. When Scottish archaeologist Duncan Mackenzie set out from Athens to Philippi to embark on the first full-scale excavations in the Aegean at the very end of the 19th century, on one occasion in particularly bad conditions, it took 10 days to reach the island of Milos. Standing out on deck today, the relatively short crossing from Eos to Naxos should only take 5 or 6 hours. The crossing from Athens to Syros had taken just a couple, and Syros to Eos not much longer. But that's when the biting reality of the Cycladic weather began to make itself known. Stranded on Eos, at the mercy of the mighty wind, I was given my first taste of what must have been a regular occurrence for mariners before the advent of the modern world. An immensely strong squall of wind having formed outside of Athens, temporarily stalling all shipping in the region. It was the end of the season on Eos, and few holidaymakers remained. The usually bustling party island now being reduced to its few hundred permanent residents, and a healthy scattering of wild-eyed, lifelong travellers. I had the particular pleasure of conversation with a reincarnated Atlantean. An Australian who'd travelled to Eos with a bag full of crystals to open a stargate, she reliably informed me. Finally setting out at 5 p.m, we headed out the long way. First to Santorini, where the very real Atlantis-esque metropolis of Akrotiri was inundated by volcanic ash during the Middle Bronze Age. Before rounding Paros and heading back up to our final destination. A thick black maelstrom of surf churning in the abyss below. I'd been exploring the ruined citadels of the mainland when I first heard of that submerged city off the Naxian shore. Perhaps it was the dusty October air. Maybe the burned off dry grass framing the immense blocks of Cyclopean masonry. But the sea appealed immensely at that moment. Just as we know it did to those late Bronze Age mariners who took to the waves from bases like Mycenae, Tiryns, Orchomenos and Thebes over 3,500 years ago to expand their glittering realms into the Aegean. Yet, unlike on the mainland, where for the most part the surviving sites from that far-flung era consist of fortified hilltop centres and overgrown cemeteries. As impressive as they often are, on Naxos, according to my guidebook, the remains of part of an entire late Bronze Age city can be seen, amidst the waves and the tourists off Grotta beach in the main settlement on the island. And not only that, but ancient Cycladic ruins too, built by the ancestors of the Mycenaeans from well over 1,000 years earlier, still standing underneath the modern town, unearthed every now and again by construction work. So then, after a week amidst the great citadels and capitals of the Mycenaean world, I found myself in Volos, where in myth the famed hero Jason and his Argonauts set out on their expedition to distant Colchis across the Black Sea, and where a very real Mycenaean palace has been excavated in recent years. From there, we set out for the sea. The ferry from Eos was itself over 50 years old, a slow-moving, elegant relic from an older time. veteran of 1,000 storms. The wine-dark sea was calm by then, accommodating even. A few beers and some pastries later, and we arrived. Ushered out the doors by expert crewmen, and onwards into one of the most important settlements in the ancient history of the Aegean. Heading south from Grotta, mountains loom in the blue sky above. Low shoreline stretching off to the west. To trace the coast further, past windswept holiday homes and plots of farmland, you'll reach an exposed promontory jutting out to the sea, flanked by a cove on either side. And on top of that crag, stone buildings of a date close to 4,000 years in the past. It's not signposted, and few know of its existence today. But this is Micravigla, one of the most important Middle Bronze Age settlements on the island, with links to Milos, Thera, mainland Greece, and arguably, most importantly, Minoan Crete. For in the last century, a fine collection of anthropomorphic figurines was found here, leading to the proposed identification of this site as a Minoan-style hilltop sanctuary, one of the only ones ever found outside of Crete, testifying to the importance of the island during that distant epoch of Minoan hegemony over the waves. Today, most visitors come here for the beaches. If they are aware of the island's history, it's the classical age that takes precedence. And yet, astonishingly, as hundreds of years of archaeological investigation has clearly demonstrated, in terms of its antiquity, Micravigla is far outshadowed by the other offerings of the island. From the 15th century AD onwards, first explorers and then antiquarians travelled to Naxos to speculate and investigate its deep past. By the time the sensational tombs of the long-lost Cycladic civilization began to be investigated on nearby Syros, it wasn't long before similar finds were made on Naxos too. A major centre for that remarkable Aegean-spanning culture that thrived over 1,000 years before even the heyday of both Minoan and Mycenaean Greece in the 2nd millennium BC. Peeling off the coast towards the vast mountains of the interior, a wilder land opens up. Low hills giving way to rising valleys, lined by oak trees and olive groves. Before long, in this starkly beautiful land, you can no longer see the sea. dwarfed by Mount Zas, the tallest on the island. One of many sites where Zeus, king of the gods, is said to have spent his childhood. Genuine Neolithic and Bronze Age remains have been excavated. At this place, where myth and archaeology entwine, gnarled ancient woodland still holds sway, just as it once did on every Cycladic island. From the bleak north of Syros to the rugged peaks of Amorkos. Other isolated remnants of that long ago time, before our ancestors began to alter their environments in the Neolithic, can still be seen at the museum in the centre of the island. In a classic Cycladic settlement. In design, not having changed much since the days of Castri and Zachos we'd seen in the days before. Though separated by more than 4,000 years. Greeted by the wide smile of the curator. In the museum, we learn of the first traces of habitation on the island at Stellida Hill. Mesolithic hunters having braved the open sea to reach new Edens like this. Great risks bringing even greater rewards. Finally, as the mountains begin falling away, the road leads down to the lowlands of the east. Here, very few people live today. Particularly towards the south, where there are no towns and few holiday resorts. Aside from a few shepherds' huts and mountain hamlets, it is a depopulated land. But this was not always the case. When metallurgy first arrived in the Aegean at the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC, here on the southeast coast is where people thrived. Their settlements, thus, having largely been saved from destruction for us to visit today. Given the sheer age of early Cycladic settlements, the bulk of evidence tends to come from cemetery sites, many of which suffered looting long before archaeologists got a chance to undertake studies. Nevertheless, a picture of a densely populated Naxos has been developed. In some areas, significantly more than it is today. Coastal settlements existing all around the island, wherever flat plains lie adjacent to safe harbours, of which there are many. Isolated by the Zas range, the southernmost Cycladic settlements at Spidos, Kalandos and Panormos must have had more in common with the neighbouring islands to the south than their Naxian neighbours to the north and west. Safe from the violent north wind, this was a safe stopping off point for travellers from distant lands. in clear view of a particularly significant religious sanctuary rising way out in the calm blue. So close, and yet so far. For in those days, at the foot of nearby Keros, stood the island settlement of Daskalio, a pyramidal visage constructed of white Naxian marble. Its size, impressive architecture, and offerings from almost every island in the Cyclades testify to its sacred importance to the inhabitants of all the islands, where we know people came from afar to celebrate and to worship. On a hilltop at the southern end of Naxos, in clear view of Keros, the settlement of Panormos must have been an important place in its day. But, ultimately, everything ends. Toward the end of its existence, at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, Panormos was heavily fortified, and like most Cycladic sites, met a fiery end. The exact circumstances that led to the end of Cycladic civilization remain some of the great mysteries of prehistoric archaeology. Climatic disturbances, natural disasters, and outside invasion all being proposed. But by around 2000 BC, it was all over, and Naxos, just like all the islands of the Aegean, underwent great change. While the Neolithic and early Bronze Ages are well represented on Naxos, for the Middle Bronze Age, we have next to nothing. Heading back over the mountains, while the south and east go silent, the Cycladic settlements that also existed on the west coast would become the nexus of a new society. At Kora, Kastraki, Agiassos, Apollonos, and Mikrivigla. It is at Mikrivigla that we get some of the best evidence for this next phase on the island. For at least some archaeologically verifiable newcomers had by then arrived. A gradual Minoanization being seen from as early as 1900 BC. In the form of settlers or incoming fashions. An outpouring of the palatial civilization of Crete that can be seen all over the Aegean at this time, and even beyond. A gradual adoption of Minoan styles being seen on roads and all the way north along the Anatolian coast to the Dardanelles, Lemnos and Samothrace, including sites in Anatolia itself, like Miletus with its excellent natural harbour. Other sites with large, safe havens for ships to call at, like Kia, Milos and Thera, became melting pots for people as well as cultures. Nodes in a burgeoning international trade network oozing from Crete to Italy in the west, the Levant in the east. This burgeoning international Cretan system can most obviously be seen at the massive city of Akrotiri on where ornate murals adorn luxury private homes. Though no so-called palatial complexes have yet been found like those on Crete, on Naxos too, links to the Cretan palatial elites have been found, in the form of inscriptions in Linear A unique Cretan writing system. Unfortunately, besides Mikri Vigla and a handful of other noted sites in the northwest and central parts of the island, there is little other evidence for the Middle Bronze Age on Naxos. But by the Late Bronze Age, all that was to change, for yet another culture had arrived. Heading back over the Zas range toward the main Cora of the island, where all roads lead today. A classical sanctuary sprawls on a low hillside. In the shade of gnarled oak trees, evidence of open-air worship and communal meals has been found, as well as occupation during the earlier Mycenaean age. In classical times, the place was a centre of worship for the demigod Dionysus, son of Zeus, that trickster deity said to have frolicked in Naxian groves during the Age of Heroes. Ultimately becoming entangled with the daughter of King Minos of Crete, after she was abandoned there by Theseus, heading back to Athens after defeating the Minotaur. While archaeological evidence of the slaying of the Minotaur is lacking, genuine Bronze Age offerings have been found at the sanctuary of Iria. This was a place where people danced, revelled, and spoke to the gods. Cultural traditions that originated on the mainland, and may well have flowed directly into the later classical age. For by the 14th century BC, though a de-Naxianization never took place, a process of Mycenaeanization had certainly arrived. It remains unclear whether the Mycenaean advance into the Cyclades was based on political expansion, conquest, or cultural and economic. But soon enough, in the form of pottery, stone vases, figurines, wall paintings, and tholos tombs, it can be seen all over the island. It was at this time that habitation seems to have permanently shifted to the west of the island, where shelter from winds, better harbours, and efficient control of the straits to Paros could be utilised, as well as being closer to the mainland. Though people would sometimes move inland to reoccupy older sites, like in the medieval age, from then on, the modern Cora, known as Grotta in ancient times, has the distinction of being the only true urban centre on the island. Unlike many other Cycladic islands, which had several competing city-states, on Naxos, in classical times, just as before in the Mycenaean age, there was only one. In the 4th century BC, the lauded philosopher Aristotle had much to say on his world. Polymath and teacher to Alexander the Great, that great cornerstone of Western thought, wrote as many as 200 treatises in his lifetime. Among them was one specifically concerning the citizens of the island of Naxos. Though, like so much from the ancient world, the work is lost today. Brief fragments do survive in the works of later writers, all of them speaking of famously wealthy Naxian citizens, all living together in one place, in one city. Archaeology and history both suggest that sometime in the very earliest days of the Archaic era, almost all the other settlements on the island fell out of use in favour of this single polis, both it and the wider island becoming synonymous with the name Naxos. By far the largest Cycladic island to have a single political centre. A situation so unique as to warrant a philosophical investigation by the likes of Aristotle. The earliest known reference to a fortified city on the island comes from the works of Herodotus, when he describes the unsuccessful besiegement of the place by the Persians in the summer of 499 BC. Later still, Athenius makes mention of the city existing earlier in the 6th century BC. A situation that remained the same by the time of the Roman writer Pliny. And though just how long that had been the case was a mystery to those ancient writers, today we have archaeology to add to the tale. Though Naxian prehistory is still an unfinished puzzle, the main core of the island today is clearly a place of astonishing antiquity. One of the only sites in the Cyclades to have evidence of habitation all the way from the early Helladic in the 3rd millennium BC to the present. And a good deal of archaeology having been carried out too, though always constricted by the difficulties of modern habitation. Consequently, unlike the Cycladic and Mycenaean levels, the precise locations of the late Archaic and Classical era cities remain unknown. Some of the very first Western European explorers to arrive on Naxos in the dying days of the Ottoman Empire noted the existence of the ancient city under the modern one. The likes of E.G. Pitton, Joseph Tournefort, E.D. Clarke and W.M. Leake, all writing accounts in the late 18th and 19th centuries, soon being followed by the earliest full-scale archaeological inquiries on the cusp of the 20th century. Excavations have continued ever since. Perhaps the most iconic site in the Cora today, just as it was in ancient times, is the remains of the colossal temple of the Archaic era, jutting out to the sea on a rocky promontory known as Palatia today. The temple, dedicated to Delian Apollo, whose sanctuary on Delos lies just over the sea to the north, was never actually finished. Though if it had been, it would have been one of the largest in the Greek world at the time, if not the largest. Bounded now by high-rises and modern streets, Plataea still wears its ancient heritage proudly. The small bays on either side likely providing good shelter in the Bronze Age from north and south winds, a double harbour for incoming ships. In the mid-20th century, Greek archaeologist Nikolaos Kondolion hypothesized Plataea to be the original Cycladic acropolis of the settlement. Though no concrete evidence has been found there thus far, the archaic temple having destroyed any foundations that may have once survived. Kondolion based his assertions on decades of uncovering ruins amidst the urban sprawl. For on the flat plain opposite Plataea, bounded by a riverbed to the east and the hills of Aplamata and Kamini to the north, the city of Grotta once sprawled. Abundant drinking water from the river and salt from nearby marshes providing a solid basis for settled life. It comes as no surprise then, given the excellent position for a settlement, that the oldest traces here go all the way back to the Neolithic. With two other hills also coated in thick habitation layers today, providing easy locations for fortified sites. One now encased in the bastions of a Venetian castle. The other, the oldest high school in the city. When German archaeologist Gabriel Welter arrived in the 1930s to embark on the first modern excavations in Naxos, he found a place of immense antiquity. Describing a number of early Helladic structures, more of which have been dug out during construction work over the last century and can still be seen. Welter also found what he described as two Cyclopean walls of a fortified settlement of the late Helladic III era, over which the remnants of a badly preserved second settlement stood. Unfortunately, no plans of the digs were ever published, nor any pottery illustrated. Welter refilling his trenches and covering them with sand after he was finished. With the subsequent hostilities between Germany and Greece, even leading to the locations of the digs being temporarily lost. The next excavators to arrive were Greeks, Nikolaos Kondolion and Vasilis Lambrinidakis, who would dig on and off at Kora all the way from 1949 to 1985. Like Welter before them, both men found evidence of a significant settlement dating from the early Bronze Age all the way through to the late Mycenaean era. As well as investigating rich elite cemeteries on the adjacent Aplamata and Kamini hills, the wealth and power of which, they concluded, should imply the existence of a Mycenaean acropolis like those of the mainland. There is a reason why this isn't a popular tourist destination. Like the vast remains of Akrotiri or Philokopi, however, not only is the proposed location of Condolion's citadel completely coated by medieval Venetian structures, but today, much of the lower city itself remains under beachfront real estate. Another significant portion lies underwater. Though only scant sections of the city have been excavated to date, whenever construction allows it, real insights have been gleaned into just how important it was in the Mycenaean era and before. Colossal walls, building structures, and even a well-built road surviving to the present. The latter constructed in a style most recently associated with similar discoveries made on Crete, at Paleocastro, Malia, and Komos, suggesting the existence of itinerant Minoan craftspeople, lending their expertise across the Aegean. Connections between Naxos and Minoan Crete that are also seen in fine pottery that closely imitates Minoan shapes and decoration. Naxian styles having leapt from plainware to elaborately sophisticated designs during the late Middle Bronze Age. Just maybe the arrival of immigrant Cretans to the settlement. Perhaps followed by native Naxians developing their own expertise to imitate the Cretan styles to near perfect level. Perhaps with the intention of selling them on for themselves. Naxians making their own fortunes from the craze for Cretan culture. Because when Minoan culture spread out across the Aegean, just as the Mycenaean way of life did after, the situation on the ground may have largely been a cultural expansion, rather than primarily a population movement. And by 1400 BC, the new craze was for the Mycenaean world. On Naxos, like much of Mycenaean archaeology, most obviously seen in the cemetery evidence. Though a scattering of fragmented Mycenaean burials have been found across Naxos, by far the best finds were made just next to the main city, where two clusters of collapsed chamber tombs at Aplamata and Kamini yielded significant amounts of metalwork from the Middle and Late Bronze Age, as well as jewellery, gold, seals, and ornate pictorial pottery. Given the clear demarcation between the two groups, researchers have suggested the possibility of two competing clans or kin groups having held sway over Mycenaean Naxos. An abundance of bronze weaponry and other war gear for horses implies the existence of a sword-wielding, horse-breeding class of warriors. Like so many elites around the globe, and in the Mycenaean world in particular, there being a clear emphasis on warfare and hunting in the grave goods. Other items including symbols of prestige and insignias of office, heavily suggesting those interred to have been active in the management of the island and governance of its economy. With clear evidence of imports not just from Crete, but Cyprus, the Dodecanese, Attica, the Peloponnese, and even the Argolid itself, These must have been very lucrative positions to hold. Naxos seeming to straddle the line between both east and west. And fascinatingly, uniquely, even after the collapse of the palace states of the mainland by the 12th century BC, it continued to thrive, making up a core part of a so-called post-palatial Aegean geography. Things were changing though, and even out here in the midst of the islands, Naxos couldn't escape. Notably within the chamber tombs at the very end of their existence in the 11th century BC, were found two now-two swords, a new type spreading across Europe at the end of the Bronze Age. For many researchers, symbolising the end of the old chariot style of warfare and coming world of the Iron Age. By the time the Persian war machine under Darius the Great arrived at Naxos in 490 BC to punish the Greek world, ravaging the then flourishing city, enslaving those who didn't flee to the mountains, the island had been continually inhabited without a visible break for thousands of years. Enjoying of late a period of true greatness, which can be seen in the impressive monuments of the nearby Pan-Hellenic sanctuary on Delos, of which Naxos was a major patron, and in the vast marble quarries and temples of the hinterlands. By the later 11th century BC, after the Mycenaean Age, those Naxian survivors of the Bronze Age collapse are thought to have retreated inland from the lower city to the raised citadel. Though today, any ruins from those middle years lie hidden beneath medieval structures. A vast Venetian castle complex taking up most of it. Of note for the curious visitor to the citadel today is the archaeological museum, filled with all manner of fascinating pieces from the long history of the island. Many of the artifacts originating from the cemeteries at Aplamata and Kamini. Still venerated today, just as they were in the centuries after the Bronze Age. Though here there wasn't a collapse as such, ways nonetheless changed over the years. Populations dwindled, and as the age of Homeric poetry flourished by the 9th or 8th centuries BC, they harked back to their mighty ancestors. In the long winter nights, battered by howling wind and rain, telling stories of the giant figures who once waged their Machiavellian struggles, voyagers who crossed the known world, and hopes for the future to do so themselves once again. In its prime, the Mycenaean city of Grotta spanned an area of some 35,000 square metres. Today, it remains the most extensively excavated of any Cycladic settlement of the late Bronze Age. Whereas the similarly impressive city of Philikopi on Milos, with its megaron at the heart of the site, is often argued to have been subject to one of the Argolid centres. On Naxos, the seat of a powerful aristocratic elite can be seen, holding sway over the abundant natural resources of the island, as well as the production and export of goods to lands far away. Perhaps alone among the Mycenaean settlements of the Cycladic Islands that we know of, Grotta may well have operated independently. Though much remains invisible, the Mycenaean settlement underneath Cora was clearly a significant urban centre, with well-designed harbour installations and various other public works like cemeteries, workshops, and perhaps most impressive of all, no doubt protecting its citizens from their violent brethren on the mainland, colossal city walls. To walk the tight-knit, winding streets of a Cycladic settlement today is to experience a very ancient method of settlement construction. The burrow-like streets with occasional covered walkways providing excellent protection from the full heat of the summer, just as they do the extreme winds of winter. For as long as people have built significant settlements on Naxos, they have built them like this. Some designs just work. Even with the heavy Mycenaean influence coming over from the mainland during the 14th century BC. It seems that older Cycladic values were merged with a fresh infusion of political might, creating something new, but still Naxian all the same. For the most part, beside the epic fortress of Agios Andreas on Sifnos, those most obvious of Mycenaean traits, the citadels, are absent from the Cyclades, Asia Minor too. Palaces with painted walls too have generally not been encountered yet. But at Grotta, typical Mycenaean fortifications can be seen, in a type of Cyclopean wall, unique in all the Cyclades. Heading through winding streets down from the citadel to the beach. In the late summer of 2022, I walked over the remains of so long ago. And finally, when we reached Metropolis Square, I found what I'd been searching for. For here, where wide-scale excavations could get deep under the city, almost every level of habitation was revealed, including, of course, the glory days of the 13th century BC. Excavations here and at other parts of the city revealed not just a flourishing settlement, but one that was beset by the ever-perennial threat in this region. Because sometime around 1200 BC, an earthquake seems to have struck. Which may have been made much worse by the inevitable flooding caused by the low-lying nature of the settlement. The old city then seems to have been levelled and a new centrally planned one built on top, with a particular north-south orientation and enclosed by mighty walls. Consisting of colossal stone base and mud brick superstructure. This latest city would survive for centuries to come. A much longer time than almost any other Mycenaean power centre at the time. Even after the breakup of the palatial system on the mainland, mercantile activity continued, as well as the high level of shipbuilding of the previous century. Though, of course, this was a dangerous time, for when central powers crumble, piracy flourishes. Archaeologist Andreas Vlachopoulos calls the Aegean sea routes at this time anti-monopolist. And large crater pots from Kos portray scenes of intense seaborne warfare, as do others from many other centres. Overall though, unlike many other areas in the Aegean, at the end of the 2nd millennium BC, Naxos wasn't just surviving, but thriving, with a community now more Naxian than anything else. As the so-called proto-geometric phase is gradually approached, narrative scenes portrayed on pottery are often triumphant, of heroic labours being undertaken by seafarers. Not surprising, for in that coming age, the exploit of heroes would be regarded above all else. At some point, a man-made channel had been built to connect the Palatia headland to the city, giving it 2 harbours to utilise. But these efforts had been too much, too late, perhaps as a result of earthquakes, or simply because of rising waters evidenced by sand deposits. By the 11th century BC, the northernmost part of the city had been completely submerged. A quay and other houses only just surviving above the waves. We don't know how or when exactly, but at some point the decision was made to abandon the place entirely, the remaining population moving their homes up to the Castro Hill, where the archaic and classical cities would develop. There, life continued as it had, the old city turning into a place for the dead. Random burials eventually being organised into a geometric era cemetery, with enclosures for tombs. There, where the still visible walls of the city stood above ground, individuals were carefully buried alongside their vaunted ancestors. Finally, a large earthen tumulus was built over the geometric cemetery at Metropolis Square. Likely becoming a focal point of worship and commemoration of those who came before. The impact they had on their descendants being so profound that they could not or would not abandon their city. Heading out of the Metropolis Museum and down toward the sea, a scattering of Mycenaean edifices can be spied. Though almost all have been covered up for protection since their excavations. Near the western end of the beach, 3 early Cycladic houses can still be seen on either side of a narrow lane. But it is out on the beach itself and the surf beyond where the best remains of all are to be found. Near perennial winds make the task difficult, but after 2 days of trying, the city underneath the waves can clearly be spied. Only future excavations will reveal more of the secrets of this Bronze Age powerhouse. Until then, aerial photography will have to suffice. Though new populations would continue to arrive during the course of the Iron Age, as the great reshuffling of the Greek colonization period began. Like most places, it is entirely likely that many inhabitants of the Cora today are descended from those heroes of long ago. Don't forget to like, subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments if you enjoyed this video. Check out the whole library of other videos I've made on the Bronze Age, and check out the tours that I'm currently doing in the real world. My name's Pete Kelly. We do things here the old-fashioned way without any of that AI nonsense. All the information is in the video description below. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.